Welcome back to my YouTube channel *. She had never been the loudest voice in the room, but she was always the one people counted on, the kind of employee who remembered small details, who cleaned up mistakes she didn't make, who stayed online long after everyone else had logged off. Not because she was asked to, but because she believed in doing things right. For years, she ignored her growing exhaustion, convincing herself that loyalty would be rewarded, that hard work would be noticed, that respect would eventually be reciprocated. But even loyalty has limits. So, when she finally booked herself a quiet vacation, no tourist chaos, no crowded beaches, just peace and distance, she made herself a promise. She would disconnect fully. She would not check emails out of guilt. She would not carry her laptop just in case. She would, for once, stop being accessible. She left behind her work phone on purpose. She left behind the version of herself who was always available. 3 days in, the sun was warm, the air tasted of salt and freedom, and for the first time in months, her shoulders weren't tense. She was sipping her morning tea slowly, not rushed, not multitasking. When her personal phone buzzed with a notification, she almost ignored it. But curiosity nudged her to take one glance. It was an email from her manager. No greeting, no acknowledgement of her vacation, just a curt line. "We need you to jump on a call in an hour. The execs want the Q3 numbers finalized." She looked at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. She didn't panic. She didn't rehearse a response. She simply allowed herself to feel what she had ignored for too long, the sheer audacity of entitlement. She typed calmly, "I'm currently on vacation and will address this when I return." No apology, no just facts, stated with grace. That she went about her day, exploring quiet markets, laughing with strangers, sitting in silence near the water, surprised at how light she felt after sending that message. She realized just how much space was freed the moment. She stopped saying yes out of fear, but entitlement rarely sits quietly when denied. The next morning, another email awaited her. This one from HR, colder, sterile, lacking even the pretense of professionalism. "Since you are unwilling to fulfill your responsibilities, your role is hereby eliminated. Your severance package is cancelled." A single paragraph, a decision made without conversation, delivered like a verdict. She read it twice, not because she was shocked but because, unexpectedly, she felt nothing. No trembling hands, no quickened heartbeat, no frantic urge to call someone for advice. There was a strange peace in that moment, a realization that she had already detached long before they sent that email. They were not taking something from her. They were confirming she was right to walk away. She typed one word, "Thanks," and then she went back to her tea. They must have expected panic. They must have imagined her scrambling to reply with apologies, begging to keep her position, clarifying that she didn't really mean to refuse. That was how they had trained their employees, to confuse exhaustion with dedication, fear with loyalty. But when her one-word response arrived in their inbox, there was nothing for them to grip onto, no emotion to exploit, no weakness to leverage. Her silence unsettled them more than any argument could have. The following morning, she returned home earlier than planned, not out of defeat, but out of strategy. She walked into the company's glass-walled conference room at 9 a.m. sharp, the exact time they had requested her presence. Executives were already seated around the long polished table, shifting awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. She took her seat without greeting anyone, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. The door opened again. This time, the company's legal counsel entered, carrying a thick folder filled with documents. Unlike the others, he didn't look irritated. He looked uneasy, as if he had discovered something no one else had cared to check. He cleared his throat and spoke with forced composure, reading directly from her contract. In the event of involuntary termination, regardless of reason, the employee is entitled to full severance, accelerated vesting of all outstanding equity, and continuation of benefits for a minimum period of 6 months. Any attempt to revoke or deny these terms constitutes breach of contract and exposes the company to legal liability. Every eye in the room turned toward her, as if expecting her to react, to smirk, to gloat, to show even the slightest satisfaction. But she didn't move. She watched them, not with anger, but with quiet clarity. For the first time, they saw her not as someone eager to serve, but as someone who could not be threatened, someone who had chosen dignity over obedience. Then it happened. The CEO, gripping his coffee mug in silence, loosened his hold, just slightly enough for it to slip through his fingers and crash against the floor. The sound echoed through the room like a verdict. No one rushed to clean it. No one said a word. They knew. They had tried to discard her like paperwork. Instead, they had signed their own humiliation. The room sat in suspended silence, the shattered pieces of porcelain glistening on the floor like evidence of everything they had failed to control. No one dared breathe too loudly. No one dared look her in the eye. It was not because she had threatened them. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't slammed her fist. She hadn't even defended herself. Her restraint was the loudest thing in the room. The legal counsel continued speaking, though now with a stiffness in his voice, as if trying to soften the blow for the board members who were already shrinking in their seats. We are, of course, prepared to finalize all severance terms immediately, as outlined. Any delay or refusal would place us in breach, which he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. A few heads dropped, acknowledging the cost of their own arrogance. She didn't smirk. She didn't revel in their discomfort. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a neatly printed copy of the very contract they had tried to ignore, and placed it gently on the table in front of her and, touched, pristine, untouched by panic. A quiet reminder, I came prepared. Did you? One of the board members shifted forward, attempting a conciliatory tone. We regret the misunderstanding, he said carefully, as though offering an olive branch woven from pretense. She turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer him the relief of a response. The truth was, this was never about money. It was about principle. It was about the unspoken expectation that employees should bow their heads when threatened. That silence meant compliance. That loyalty meant self-sacrifice. They had mistaken her grace for weakness. Now they were learning the difference. Her severance paperwork was pushed toward her moments later. Signatures already applied. The compensation that had been revoked in arrogance was now returned in desperation. They waited, frozen, for her approver, men and women who once spoke with certainty now watching her, as though she held the fate of the room in her hand. She didn't rush. She read every line at her own pace. They waited. No one dared interrupt, and without saying a word, she picked up the pen. The pen felt unexpectedly light between her fingers, not like a signature of compliance, but a closing gesture, the final stroke of a chapter already mentally finished. She signed her name slowly, not because she needed more time, but because they needed to watch. They needed to understand that she was not signing out of fear or relief. She was signing because she chose to. When she placed the pen down, no one moved. It was as if the entire room was waiting for her next decision. For once, the balance of power had shifted so quietly, so completely, that no one dared pretend otherwise. The executives, accustomed to commanding rooms with their presence, now sat frozen, unsure if standing would be perceived as disrespect or dismissal. She didn't grant them the comfort of direction. Instead, she stood on her own terms, gathering her contract and the neatly prepared folder she'd brought with her. Not once did she look hurried. Every motion was deliberate. Every second stretched long enough for them to feel the weight of their own miscalculation. The legal counsel, perhaps the only one in the room with any remaining composure, cleared his throat softly. If there's anything further you require, please let us know, he said, though even he avoided meeting her eyes. It wasn't a courtesy, it was caution. She paused at the head of the table, resting her hand lightly on the chair she'd been sitting in, not leaning, not clinging, simply touching it as a silent reminder. You tried to remove me from this seat. Now I walk away from it willingly. Still, she said nothing. She didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't offer closure. She didn't offer comfort in the form of polite niceties like it's okay or I understand, because it wasn't okay, and she didn't understand. They had shown her everything she needed to know, and she, in return, had shown them everything they never expected to see. What true professionalism looks like when it's no longer used to serve, but to stand tall. She walked toward the door without haste, the soft click of her heels against the polished floor echoing louder than any speech could. No one dared to follow. No one dared to call after her. They simply watched people who once spoke over her, now rendered silent witnesses to her exit. At the doorway, she paused, not to turn back, but to make sure her hand left no smudge on the glass as she pushed it open. She didn't want even that, a mark of her presence left behind in a place that had never truly valued it. Some exits are not escapes. Some exits are declarations. Outside, the hallway was empty. The world was ordinary again. No applause, no witnesses, just quiet, but it was different now. She was different now, not transformed by anger, but clarified by realization. They hadn't taken anything from her. They had simply revealed that she had outgrown them long ago. Her phone buzzed in her bag as she walked toward the elevator. Emails, calls, probably attempts to soften the damage, to rewrite the narrative into something more palatable. She didn't bother checking. Their voices no longer held authority in her life. She stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close with a sense of finality, not like an ending but like the sealing of a vault. She had given them years of dedication, and in return, they had tried to test her with disrespect. Their mistake was assuming she needed the door they'd tried to slam. She didn't. She carried her own key. As the elevator descended, her reflection in the stainless steel came into view, composed, steady, untouched by the chaos she had just left behind. No triumph in her expression, no bitterness either, just certainty. She had not fought them. She had allowed them to defeat themselves. And that quietly, undeniably, was the most powerful response of all. She stepped out of the building and let the morning air wash over her. Cool, quiet, unbothered by the drama she had just left behind. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing anywhere. She wasn't answering to anyone. She wasn't needed. She was free. Not the kind of freedom that comes from escape. The kind that comes from clarity. She didn't need to announce her victory. She didn't need to prove anything to those who failed to see her worth. Their greatest punishment was knowing they had lost someone who had held their foundation together without ever demanding praise for it. They would scramble. They would replace her. They would pretend nothing had changed. But it had, because true power isn't in the title they take or the role they restore. It is in walking away with your dignity untouched. And as she walked toward her car, sunlight catching the calm on her face, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would remember the day they tried to break her, as the day she reminded them she could never be owned, and she didn't need their approval. She had something far greater, self-respect and a future that was finally hers.